and the spirit of man will go upward to the God that gave it. And the spirit of animals simply dissipates into the ground. We are a living soul, a spirit, a being that persists beyond a simple body. We are not simple machines. We are, we could say, eternal beings. And, of course, that makes a difference whether we're going to live with God or live apart from God for the rest of eternity. But God has given us a complex set of emotions. He's given us creativity. He's given us the ability to communicate. And so when we see all these aspects of God in the Bible, and God describes himself in ways like he says he is just or he is love, and we sometimes look at it backwards and we say, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, they're loving. Oh, so God must be loving the same way. I know so-and-so is a just person, so God's the same way. Well, that's the opposite. We are kind, or we can be kind. We can show love. We can have justice. We can have a sense of purpose because we are reflecting our Creator who designed us this way. He designed us in a small way that we reflect him. And when we do what we're designed to do, we make him look good. But notice here, talking about man being created in God's image, God tells man that man is given dominion over all of the creatures of the earth. He's given dominion over all the creatures of the earth. I want to call this the ability to manage others, the ability to manage others. To manage other creatures, to rule over. We definitely see in the Bible this concept of God's authority and how that God has endued man with this similar authority structure where God has the right to tell us what to do, and then he gives us dominion and allows us to be managers over other creatures, to rule. Animals don't have this ability. As far as I know, animals, all the creatures I've heard of, don't have dominion over other creatures. You don't go out into the jungle and find a colony of ants that has, overpowered a herd of lions, and they're keeping them under their thumb. We do call lions the king of the jungle, don't we? But we don't call him king of the jungle because he gives out laws and, keeps the snakes in check and makes sure that baboons are playing nicely with each other, make sure that, the natives aren't encroaching in on his territory. We call lions the king of the jungle, but they only, run after other creatures and kill them and eat them. They don't try and manage. They don't have dominion. But God has dominion over his creation, and God has given mankind this mandate to have dominion over all of the other creatures on the earth. So when we go out and we decide that, we're going to create a school of fish. I remember this was a few years ago when the Crockett's went over to the island of Mayotte. And I watched, I don't know where I got the video, but somewhere on YouTube I found this video about fishermen in Mayotte and how that they had these school of fish in their lagoon. And this really intricate, cage system for their fish. And they would farm fish there off of their island. And they had them in these really intricate, so they'd take their motorboat out in the lagoon to get to their fishing pond that was in the middle of the lagoon. And they were all there fishing there. And then, when they were raised, and they'd take them out and sell them at the market. It was really cool. And mankind had used the creativity that God has given him to have dominion over these fish for the good purpose of feeding the people on Mayotte. So this ability to manage others, this dominion, this ability to have rule over others is something that God has given us, and we have because we're made in God's image. There's some interesting verses in the Bible that have to do with dominion. Okay, in the book of Nehemiah, those returning from the exile reference the fact that when the Israelites forgot God, he would allow others to have dominion over them. He would allow other kingdoms to rule over them because they had rejected God. In Psalm 72, we'll read this one, Psalm 72. It's talking about the best king. The best king. And this is a psalm for Solomon. I believe that David wrote it. But he's kind of picturing the ideal king. And realistically, this only gets fulfilled in Jesus. But verse 7, in his days shall the righteous flourish, and the abundance of peace so long as the moon endureth. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, and from the river unto the ends of the earth. To be under the kingship or dominion of another is not a bad thing. As Pastor Lee likes to say, benevolent dictatorship is the most efficient form of government, right? It's not a bad thing to have Jesus as king and to be under his dominion. Dominion is not a bad thing. And God, in his dominion mandate, has given us the ability to have dominion over the creatures on the earth. Now think about it from a humanistic standpoint. If man has simply evolved and there is no greater authority other than ourselves, who gives us the right to have dominion over the creatures on our earth? Well, we have to simply usurp that authority. Well, I want this authority, so I'm going to take it. Survival of the fittest. I'm the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful. So those pigs have got to stay in my pig pen on my farm because I'm going to force them to do so. So you carry that thought over, right? Carry it over into business or into government, right? Oh, those puny little citizens, I'm the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful. I've just got to keep them under my thumb. Yeah. Just give them enough of what they want, but keep them under my dominion so they serve me. And why not? Survival of the fittest. And in a humanistic standpoint, you can't tell the dictator, be it Venezuela or Cuba or pick your favorite, Marxist empire, you can't tell them that they're wrong. Survival of the fittest. Because if it's wrong to rule over humans like that, then it would be wrong to rule over the turtles or the fish like that. But you see, what we believe matters, and it affects what we do. And so only the biblical standpoint makes sense for mankind. We have the ability to have dominion over the creatures of the earth because God gave us this authority. So when we choose to, take rats, let's just say rats, and put them in the laboratory and test them to see if a brand new kind of toothpaste will make your teeth fall out or not, right? This is within our dominion mandate. Now, of course, a lot of scientists cross the line and they just start torturing them because, let's see how long it takes before his eyes fall out if we put toothpaste in his eyes, okay? We're not talking about torture here, but to a degree, God has given man dominion over the creatures, and so we can use them to benefit mankind for his good, okay? So this dominion, this ability to manage other creatures, to rule, has been given to us by God, and in it we reflect God. Okay? Now, also in Genesis chapter 1, we find, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. Subdue the earth. Now, this word subdue is interesting because every other time that this word subdue is used in the Old Testament, it refers to, usually in a negative way, of putting other people under your subjection. But here it can't mean that because there aren't any other people. So when God says, take the earth and subdue it, I believe he's encompassing everything on the globe. To take the earth and manipulate it, utilize it, to go forth and find the rich resources that are given to us on this planet and use them for good. The difference between man subduing and animals on the planet is that animals simply use the planet. Birds, they build nests. They go find sticks or twigs or mud or whatever, and they just construct. Beavers, they go and find logs, and they cut down trees, and they construct a dam. But man has the ability to manipulate those resources into exponential abilities. Man can take a tree and simply, instead of just rearranging it, like animals do, he can grind it up and create paper, or cut it into square pieces and fit them together to frame houses. There's a type of fish down in the streams of the Smoky Mountains National Park that rearranges rocks to kind of build a little den in a stream. And they simply take those rocks and rearrange them. But mankind takes those rocks and they're like, I wonder what happens if I grind them down into powder. And I wonder what happens if I add all these other elements. Wow, I can make concrete. What can I do with this concrete? Oh, I can build skyscrapers with this concrete. I can pave roads with this concrete. I can build houses with this concrete. And man, because we are created in God's image, we have the ability to manipulate the planet, to take these resources and enrich them and create all kinds of new things. This reflects our Creator God. God has given us this ability to create, to use our imaginations to create things. And so, like Jack and Mac were seeing, right? Mankind is like, well, I want to move goods from here to here, so I'll invent a railroad, right? But then you have a railroad crossing a bike path, and you have a problem. Because, you have two things that need to go crossways, and so they're, I can build crossing guards and, twist metal and paint it and make the arms come down and paint stripes on the pavement to indicate, flow of traffic. We don't see creatures in our planet doing this. They don't have the ability to do this. Man does this because he's created in God's image. And so, in a small way, every time humans use their imaginations to create something good, we are glorifying God. And even though atheists or anybody else, they want to take credit for what they're doing, through the lens of the Bible, they're pointing back to God. Because God says, look at those engineers down there building that. I created them to do that. I gave them the mind and the ability to imagine, to think up these things. God says, they're doing what I designed them to do. Psalm 115, verse 16 says, the heavens, even the heavens, are the Lord's, but the earth hath he given to the children of men. So God has given us imagination. He's given us minds and set us out into the planet to create good things. Okay, but that isn't exactly what happened, was it? Because pretty quickly, man seized for himself the knowledge of good and evil. And it all went downhill from there. Because man was corrupted. A man was fallen. And so now we have this great imagination that God gave us, but now we have the power to imagine and create evil. And of course, this grieves God. So let's go now to Genesis 6. Genesis 6. And God saw that the wickedness of man, we're in verse 5, Genesis 6, 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Verse 11, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. That is a sad passage, a very sad passage. Because here was mankind, and we still do this to this day. We are created in God's image, but instead of using our imaginations to have dominion over and subdue the earth for good purposes, now we are fallen. God's image in us is corrupted, and we're consumed with using our imaginations to please ourselves, to create evil, to imagine ways to do violence to others. Notice what it says. It says that God saw man's wickedness, that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Man was using his mind to imagine evil things, wicked things, wrong things. Mankind was using his mind for the destructive power of evil. And we still have this ability today, unfortunately, don't we? My mind is an incredible thing. But how am I going to use it? How am I going to use my mind? Am I going to use it to imagine evil? Oh, well, Pastor Peter, I would never act on that. Right. It all starts in the mind. You imagine it first, and then you act on it. Okay, they imagined evil, but then it says that they filled the earth with violence. So they were imagining ways that they could rebel against God, that they could be selfish, and they acted on it, and the whole earth was filled with man using this incredible mind that God has given us to do what? To shed fellow man's blood, to be violent towards fellow man. And verse 12 says that man had corrupted his way on the earth. God created the world. He created the system of the universe. God placed man here as a caretaker. He said, here, take care of it, manage it, use it, create good things. And instead, man was using his imagination to pervert God's way. Man was using his imagination, and to this day, we use our imaginations to think, okay, well, God made it this way. How can I twist it and pervert it? How can I twist it into something that God did not intend for it to be used this way? I think of some very wicked, some people, call them philosophers or psychologists or whatever, and they're like, I can tell impressionable young people that they actually are the opposite gender. I will twist what God has created them into something that God didn't create them. I'll change their body. I will replace God. God thinks he created man. I'm going to recreate him. And whether anybody actually says this in word, okay, we know that the forces of evil are thinking this behind those people. Satan and his demons want to twist everything that God has created into something evil. Be it music, relationships, buildings, leisure time, amusement. And Satan wants to take it and he wants to twist it and pervert it into something that God did not design it to do. I think it's illegal in most places, but what comes to my mind is cockfighting, for one. God created chickens, he created birds, and they do bird things and lay eggs. But God didn't design them to fight each other for man's pleasure. Right? In the same way, God created man, but man figured out sometime back in the Roman Empire, I can take these men, slaves, or indebted or whatever, and I can turn them into gladiators. And they can go out there and fight each other and kill each other for pleasure. And they're taking something good that God has made and twisting it into something evil. When I was in Colombia, I was talking with a guy named Oscar, who's kind of serving as like a native missionary. The American missionary had come in, and he was a Colombian man who was also there at the same time that God had brought into the city as a missionary. And God brought them there at the same time for the same purpose, to plant a church. So you had this American and this Colombian there in the city of Bucaramanga working together. And Oscar was telling me how that previously he had been a missionary to an Indian tribe up in the mountains. And he had done some very strange things because he had kind of gone native with them. But he was telling me about, I don't remember why he was telling me, but he was telling me that this tribe would take coca leaves, and they would take seashells, and they would crush them together, and then they'd kind of put it in their mouth for like medicinal purposes. And I was horrified. I was like, coca leaves, that's where cocaine comes from. You were taking cocaine. And what he said, I'll never forget. Oscar said, no, he said, Peter, coca leaves are not bad. God has created coca leaves with certain qualities and purposes that can be used for good. He said, but bad men have taken coca leaves and have distilled them down into create something that God never intended, and that's cocaine. He said, bad men have taken something that God has made as good, but when you take it and you super concentrate it, you can sell it to those fat gringos up north and get them to do all kinds of crazy things, right? So here in North America, we get cocaine and, take it as an illegal drug, as an escape, but it's a manipulation of God's good creation. Mankind used his imagination to create something evil. And it's all over the world, right? You simply have to turn on the news. You simply have to turn on the news and you hear all kinds of weird stories of very creative things that people did in order to do evil. And that makes God sad. That grieves God. We'll come back to that at the end, okay? But mankind's imagination has been corrupted, And before we move on, as Christians, we're called on by the Holy Spirit to bring every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So we cannot give the Holy Spirit the excuse, oh, it's just in my imagination. It's okay if I, read this novel and imagine these things, or watch this movie and imagine these things, because I'm not acting on it, I'm just imagining it. Well, no. Christ wants our imaginations to be used for wholesome purposes. Okay, so we'll come back to that. But first, let's look at human life. Human life. Being created in God's image means that human life is valuable. We're not just distinct from the creatures around us on this globe. We are more valuable than the creatures on the globe. So go with me to Genesis 9 now. Genesis 9. So this, of course, is after Noah's flood now. And Noah and his family have gotten off the ark. And now God has something very important to tell them. Verse 5. Well, okay, so verse 1, right? God blessed Noah and his sons, said, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. That's what he told Adam and Eve. Now, verse 2, the creatures of the earth are going to be afraid of you. Verse 3, he authorizes eating meat. Every living thing can be meat for you. Verse 4, don't eat blood. Verse 5, and surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. And whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Valuable. Valuable. Human life is value. It has worth. It holds value. It's special because we're worth something to God, because we have something that no other creature on the planet has, and that is the stamp of God's image. We are valuable on this planet above all the other creatures, whether it be sea turtles or whales or monkeys. We have value as humans over all the other creatures because we are made in the image of God. And so God says this. He says, look, killing and eating an animal isn't a big deal. But you shed man's blood, that is a big deal. And God says, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to hold every beast accountable for shedding man's blood. God says, you take man's life, your life is forfeit. By man shall his blood be shed. A murderer's life is forfeit for taking the life of another. Now, this places the highest value on human life that we can place on it. Now, if God said, all right, whoso sheddeth man's blood, okay, you kill another human being, you're going to have to pay the man's family 100 gold coins. What would be the value of human life? 100 gold coins, right? If God had placed any punishment on mankind for murder less than the murderer's life, then human life would be less than that. But because God says, you take a person's life, your life is now forfeit, we place the highest value on human life that we can, and that is life itself. And this is why, parallel passage, we go over to Romans 13, where God has entrusted governments with the sword to enact justice, to punish evil. The death penalty is necessary and right, because that is the only way to ensure the value of humankind being created in God's image. Suppose I was an artist. I'm not, don't worry. Actually, I do like to draw computer drawings, okay? Like some of those kids' church pictures that we used back during the shutdown. I like to take those and try and recreate them, but they don't look good. But anyways, actually there was one photo I used. It was Moses. I drew him up on a mountain, and it had Mount Sinai with the fire in the background. Okay, let's suppose that I've got this printout of this picture, and Joe comes over and he looks at this and he's like, "Boy, that's ugly. Who drew that thing?" And he throws it on the ground and he stomps on it. I'm going to be hurt, okay? A little bit. Even though I'll pretend not to be Joe. I'll be a little bit hurt because it has a little bit of sentimental value to me simply because I drew it. And it took me a lot of time to draw Moses. And so it holds a little bit of sentimental value to me. And so if he purposely ruins it, okay, I'm going to be a little ticked off. But if Joe comes over and he looks and it's a computer drawing of my wife, and he does the same thing, what a terrible picture. He rips it up and throws it on the ground, stomps on it. Okay, now Joe's in trouble. Right? Why? Because that was a picture of my wife? No, because it was the image of my wife. It was a representation of my wife. It wasn't my wife, but it was a representation of her. And I'm going to take personal offense at someone taking an image of my wife and treating it like that. Because she's valuable to me, and so a representation of her is valuable to me because of whom it represented. We are God's painting. And we don't just represent God's favorite person, we represent God himself. Each and every person on the globe, be it a small child, or a mentally handicapped person, or someone that's born without a nose. Okay? Black, white, yellow, red, doesn't matter your skin color. Every single person on this planet is made in the image of God. We are like, in a small way, we have these elements in us that reflect back to God himself, our creator. And that gives us incredible value. Now, I think it's interesting. Repeatedly in the Bible, we find the phrase, all men. And I was looking for something else, but I came across this, and I thought it was really interesting. In using the phrase, all men, God clearly demonstrates to us that because all people are created in his image, we, as Christians, are to treat all people with love and honor. Here's just some of the verses, okay? Acts 17:30 says, God now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. Romans 12 says, recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men, if it is possible. As much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. Galatians 6:19, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men. 1 Thessalonians 5, be patient toward all men. Ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men. 1 Timothy 2:4 tells us that God will have all men to be saved. 2 Timothy 2:4 says, the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men. Titus 2:11, the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men. Hebrews 12:14, follow peace with all men. See, in biblical theology, in biblical anthropology, I realize that every single human being on this planet was created in God's image and has incredible value to God, and therefore I must treat every person with incredible value. So here's how it applies to me. Do I treat people as common objects, or do I treat them as a special creation of God? If I care more about the sea turtles than I care about my neighbor, there is a problem. I could say a lot about sea turtles and plastic straws, but I won't. Okay. What I believe about people affects the way that I'm going to treat them. And as Christians, I must ask myself, have I allowed a humanistic philosophy to infiltrate my thinking? Because when I go out, how do I see people? Do I see them at all, or are they simply objects in my way? The person texting on his phone in front of me at the stoplight, they are an object in my way. I'm on the way from point A to point B, and this is an object, and so I'm going to lay on the horn because they need to get with the program. They have interrupted my day. What I realize that this is a person that is created in God's image. And they're special to God, even if they are being stupid and texting on their phone at a stoplight. Yes? Okay. Not like any of you guys have ever done that before, you know? Titus 3, verses 2 and 3 says, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. For we ourselves also were sometimes foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving diverse lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. But after that, what happened? The kindness and love of God, our Savior, toward man appeared. Right? And so I need to see people through the lens that God sees them. He sees them as these people that are valuable to him, that he created, but they're lost. They're in darkness. They're blinded. They're deceived. They're serving the lusts of their own evil heart, using their imaginations for evil, but God has compassion on them because they're still special to him, and he still wants to save them. And he wants to use us to have compassion and save and share with them the love of God. Okay, so I must see people as created in God's image. I must view human people as human people and realize that they're incredibly valuable to God, and so I need to treat them as if they are valuable too. I can start here in the church, right? Every person that God has placed in this body is important to God, and they should be important to me. Not just because they're a people, but because they're part of my church family, right? And that means I should know their names. I should get to know people. They shouldn't just be, oh, it's that body over there that's sitting in that row. Somebody over there, I don't know who they are, but it's somebody. I should get to know their names and love them. Okay, so if God has given us an imagination, given us the dominion mandate, told us to subdue the earth, how should I respond? Well, I should create good. I should use the creative abilities that God has given me to do good. To do good to other people, to create good, to imagine things, to use the energy, the life force that God has given me to create good in our world. And this will make God look good. This will glorify God when I use my mind to imagine and create beautiful, helpful things. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God." Can you glorify God when preparing a meal for guests? Yes, you can. Can you glorify God in the way that you mow your lawn? Yeah, you can. In the way you drive your car or the way you interact with your children. We can glorify God in everything we do. We can make God look good in all of our actions. And when we use our brains, our imaginations, when we use what God has given us to love other people and create good, that glorifies God. Okay, but obviously the flip side is true. We must not use our imaginations for evil. We must not use our imaginations to create or imagine things that are in rebellion to God, that are perversions of what God has created. God calls us to be a salt and a light in our world. And so we as people should oppose the wrong use of imagination in our world. We as Christians should, as Ephesians 5:11 says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. We should be willing to stand up against someone else's use of their imagination to create evil. This is why we would oppose gladiator fights if we were in the Roman Empire. This is why we oppose genocide, whether it be South America or Africa. This is why we oppose things like pornography, drunken parties, and drugs like cocaine. Every day, the news is filled with people using their imaginations for evil. And we stand up when we say, that's wrong, and here's why. Because this is the way that God said it is to be, and they're taking their imagination to create something evil, and that's going to hurt people, and that's going to defy what God says is good. And we've got a book that tells us what's right and wrong, and that's why we can oppose those things. From a humanistic standpoint, you cannot oppose slavery. Hey, survival of the fittest, the strongest wins. What's wrong with enslaving another person and beating them and giving them meager food to eat until they die? If you're bigger and stronger than they are, well. But no. From a biblical standpoint, we can say, no. That's not how you would want to be treated if you were created you're created in God's image. They're created in God's image. God calls you to treat them with kindness and love. So oppose evil and, of course, value human life. There's a phrase in 1 Peter 2 that I never stopped to think about before. It simply says, honor all men. 1 Peter 2:17. honor all men. To honor is to treat something as if it's valuable, to hold up in esteem, to show respect. And God says, hey, you should treat all people if they're valuable. You should honor all men. Doesn't matter if they're young, doesn't matter if they're old. God is the only one who has the right to give life. God is the only one who has the right to take it away. And so in God's sight, there's no such thing as a useless old person. There's no such thing as a person who is just, needs to be knocked off the block because they're no longer useful to society. They're no longer contributing to the gross domestic product. They're no longer being productive. No. In God's sight, they're valuable because they're a people. And even if they're completely unable to care for themselves, they still have value because they bear the image of God. So, Anthropology, Lesson 1. Mankind is created in the image of God. This is an important foundational truth, but it's really important as we look at the rest of our studies in anthropology. Next week, we're going to be looking at relationships, how that God has created people as social creatures. And starting with the foundation of man being created in God's image, God has given us a lot of guidelines, instructions, commandments on how we're to treat other people. All right. Do we have another song, I think? Yes.
Let's stand together and turn to number 424. Number 424. This song is entitled "A Tender Heart," and it speaks of devoting all of our talents and abilities to the Lord, and also speaks about loving those people around us and seeing them as souls, and caring about their souls and sharing the gospel with them. So 424, "A Tender Heart."
I would give thee every part.
may be seated.
All right, David's coming with our missions updates for tonight. Thanks so much for coming, David. And Mario, if you could take notes for us and come down and pray right after David's done, that'd be great.
All right, it's my privilege to bring to you the reports of our missionaries overseas. The first one we have tonight is from the Berean Baptist Bible College and Seminary in Bangalore, India. And started off, the first update we've got just says that they're very thankful for the safe, comfortable home they have with sufficient food and water and supplies during this time. As they know, many people in India do not have this provision. And they're asking for prayer for the people in India that do not have the comforts that they might have at this moment, and also because they also live in spiritual darkness and in physical need every day. Now, they're thankful that back in March, on March 13th, they were able to graduate 213 students from their college and seminary, and India went into a nationwide lockdown on March 23rd. So they were able to have a live graduation. So they're very thankful for that. And they're also thankful that many of their students were able to return home before all the transportation was closed. But they have currently 80 students that are staying on the campus that did not have a way to go home or a place to live during the summer. So there's a very short update for them, but they're also praying that God will continue to keep them healthy at the school with all those that have stayed behind. The second and final update we have tonight is from the Willoughbys ministering in Estonia. And they're thankful that the restrictions are gradually being lifted. They've been very thankful to be able to meet for the last few services at their meeting place in the center of the town at the Petrie's Shopping Center. Their new meeting place has encouraged several of the teens to visit on Sundays. They say for their teen time update, they say that due to the fear of COVID-19, not all of our teens are allowed to meet with us right now. But they do have a faithful core of about 3 teen girls with their own daughter. They of course have been having a great time with that, with some outside games, roasting of marshmallows, and learning more about God and His Word. And they're also thankful for that team that came in and helped them start the youth group last summer. On updates about their VBS, they actually held a mini VBS during the last few weeks, and it lasted for just 2 days, but they had 17 children, including the helpers, and he had the joy of leading 2 people to the Lord on the second day. They're praying that these children return in August for their week-long VBS. And then future prayer requests they have is that August is shaping up to be their month of opportunity during this time, because in addition to the VBS that they're planning, they're also planning a father-son camping trip and possibly an outreach Sunday. And also at the end of August, the town has a local fair as well as a neighborhood cafe day. So they're planning to set up a booth for their church and offer free coffee and cookies and invite people to an evangelistic event. And they ask that we'll keep these events in prayer, and they're saying that the Estonians are acknowledging that God has given them a great example of resilience throughout this time. And that is the end of our missions updates for tonight.